There are some basic components to the face of the computer module that I would like to review before we get into the actual function of the programming of the antalgic tract unit. Let's start with the basic controls. On the lower right-hand side of the screen is an on-off key switch. The key can only be removed in the off position. Turn the unit on by turning the key as you would any other ignition. The screen that will come up will have a patient safety message, and at that time, in order to initiate using any of the other controls, you must touch the reset button. At the very top right-hand corner of the machine is an emergency user stop button. It works very much in the same way as the patient stop button, and when pressed, will automatically turn the machine off. And once again, the patient safety screen will appear. To reset this, you must turn the red knob to the right, and it will release and come out to a position that is no longer depressed. At that time, you will touch reset on the screen, and you can once again use the controls on the computer. The two other controls that are here are for chair recline and chair elevation. Turning it to the right will recline the unit, turning it to the left will elevate the unit. And the second control below that is for thigh translation, commonly referred to as the seat translation, which will make the seat move in and out, or forward and back rather. The first button on the lower left portion of your screen is the manual position button. This button has all manual controls for controlling all the actuator motors on the antalgic tract unit. In the upper left is the recline actuator control, which again, by pushing the icon, will affect the movement of that particular motor. So to bring the chair to the upright position, you would use the one on the left. To recline the unit, you would press the one on the right. To the right of that, in the upper right position, is the cervical position icons. These controls will move the cervical decompression unit upward and downward so that you can establish your force and or stroke settings when administering cervical decompression. The icons on the lower left are for thigh position and will move the seat bottom in the direction of the arrows. This one on the left will move the unit outward. The one on the right will move the seat bottom unit inward. Finally, we have the lumbar position actuator controls, which are used much in the same way as the cervical position controls to determine the height of the lumbar seat bottom or how far down the lumbar seat bottom moves when you're performing lumbar decompression. There are two additional controls, one on the upper right and one on the lower right, for auto positioning for cervical decompression and for lumbar decompression. Essentially what this will do is it will place the seat bottom and the head section into its proper position prior to setting up the patient for decompressive therapy in either one, depending on which one you wish to use. It makes it a little bit easier and eliminates some of the steps of having to juggle the seat position and the head section. It'll do it for you automatically. On the lower part of the screen, we have the main button, which returns you to the main screen. We also have the button to get into the lumbar therapy portion of the program, and we also have the button to get into the cervical therapy portion of the program. From the main screen, we have the lumbar therapy button, which when depressed brings you to the lumbar therapy selection screen. In the lumbar therapy selection screen, you have the main button to return you to the main menu. You have the force setup button, which allows you to set up decompression using poundage as your parameter, and the stroke setup button for setting up decompression using stroke length as your parameter. And the last button is the auto position button, which enables you to pre-place the antalgic tract unit prior to placing the patient onto the unit. For the purposes of demonstration, we will go into the stroke setup. In this screen, there will be a new set of buttons. In the upper left is the main screen button. Below that is a back button, which takes you back to the previous screen. In the upper right is a session summary button, and below that is the therapy button, which will take you to the therapy screen. In setting up the patient for lumbar decompression using stroke, we will first teach the stroke position by moving the actuator into the decompressed position and then teaching that position to the computer. We will then release the decompression to the desired level and teach that position to the computer. There are two other buttons which allow you to move the cervical head section either up or down for patient comfort. Once your positions are established using stroke, you can then go to the therapy screen. It should be noted that the setup for lumbar force is identical. Rather than using the distance method, we're using the poundage method when using force. On the display screen, you will see both the millimeters of stroke and force. When you're using lumbar decompression in the stroke setup, the poundage will have this notation next to it saying reference only. If we had done this through the lumbar force, the reference marks would be under stroke and it would show you the actual force taught to the machine, and it would be the exact reverse of what you see. From this screen, you hit the therapy button. And on the next screen here, you can now set up your time, which can be done by 10-minute increments on the left and individual 1-minute increments on the right. So in this case, we have 11. You hit the X button. To the right of the start button, we have the pull dwell times and the release dwell times in tens of seconds and individual seconds. And right now, this unit is set, this protocol is set to 5 seconds of pull dwell and 2 seconds of release dwell. Your target strokes are noted on the upper part of the screen. And once again, for reference only, you have the weight. You have plus and minus buttons on this screen to add additional stroke length in either direction, either less decompression or more decompression. And that could be adjusted during the course of the treatment. We will start the therapy by hitting the start button, at which time the unit will start to cycle upward and downward. There is a clock located on the screen showing the total treatment time and the time remaining of the treatment as the treatment counts down. If for whatever reason you wish to stop the treatment entirely, simply hit the stop button. The cycle stop initiated window will open, and as soon as it completes that stroke cycle, it will go to the stop position. It is now waiting to be reinitiated. We will hit the start button again. The therapy is going, and should there be some reason why the operator wishes to stop the treatment in an emergency situation, all he would need to do is hit the emergency stop button. So our parameters are what we set them for earlier with an 11-minute time frame. Let's once again initiate the lumbar decompression therapy. If for whatever reason the user wants to perform manual techniques to the patient or mobilize the spine using the articulating seat bottom, the operator would then use the foot pedals to interrupt the treatment cycle, at which time another window will open, which states lumbar stroke. If I wish to add more decompression, I press down on the pedal. The indicator will show the old and now the new, old being 42, new being 48. And I can set that new parameter. And I can set a new release value, and then I will hit the set button, and that'll set that parameter. Now, when I hit the go button here, it will reinitiate the therapy with the new parameters that I've established. And that is limitless. I can pause the unit during the lumbar stroke as often as I like and make those settings. If I do not wish to use the new settings, I simply hit the Go button and it will return to the last group of settings. And from here I will hit the Back button, which brings me to the Setup screen. There is a Session Summary button in the upper right-hand corner which will allow you to see the settings of that particular treatment. Additionally, it will allow you to assign a session number to a particular treatment as opposed to a name, and to be in compliance with HIPAA. Hit the Save button and another window will open. That window will show you a number pad, and it is up to the user to assign the numbers for that particular session. In this case, I've assigned it 1122. I will now hit the little Enter button, and it is now saving the session, as you can see by the yellow indicator. From the lumbar stroke setup screen, one can access the session summary screen by hitting the button in the upper right-hand corner. This will identify the stroke and force settings for either cervical or lumbar decompression. It'll also identify the therapy time. From here, you have several other buttons. You can save the session and assign it a unique ID. You can recall a session for the purposes of comparison, or you can delete a session. The other button on this screen is the Main button, which takes you back to the main menu. Cervical therapy, like lumbar therapy, has the same series of buttons on the lower portion of the screen. On the lower left is the Main button, which allows you to return to the main screen, a force setup button to set up for poundage, a stroke setup button to set up for distance, and an auto position button, which will pre-position the antalgic tract unit prior to placing the patient on the unit. For the purposes of demonstration, we will use the stroke setup, and once you hit that button, you'll be taken to the cervical stroke setup screen. Here, just as in the lumbar setup, you have the ability to alter the lumbar position so that the patient fits more comfortably for cervical decompression, and we have the ability to set up for cervical decompression. We will add some stroke for the decompression, and we will teach that stroke position. We will lower or reduce the stroke to release the decompression, and then we will teach that position. Again, you have for reference in this particular setup poundage readings so that you can make note of them for the future if you should decide to change the patient's protocol from stroke to poundage. From here we hit the Therapy button, and we're brought to the cervical stroke therapy screen. Once again, we have buttons on the left, the upper left being the button to return to the main menu, the back button, which will take you back to the setup screen, plus and minus buttons to add more or less stroke, depending upon what we wish to do, our targets and our current values. Once again, they're poundage for reference use only. If this was cervical force therapy, the buttons would look the same, except the reference would change. Instead of being in force or poundage, it would be in stroke. Here we again have the pull dwell and release dwell buttons, tens of seconds on the left, single seconds on the right for both pull, dwell, and release dwell. The time setup, once again, by pressing time, will open a window to allow you to set the time of your treatment. When completed, hit the X and the Start button, which will initiate the therapy. Again, reviewing the foot pedals. If at any point you wish to do manual techniques, such as rotation or lateral bending or whatever you choose to do with the patient, you can reestablish new values by hitting the Set button once the patient's into the new position you would like them to be, and then hit the Go button, or if you'd like to just reinitiate where you were before, simply hit the Go button. We will now hit the Stop button and return to the cervical stroke setup screen. And once again, in this screen, we can go to the session summary, which will show us, in this case, we did cervical treatment, showing us our stroke parameters, our time, and if we wish, we can assign a unique number for this particular session and recall it later or delete it. From here, we will return back to the main screen.